walked down the aisle, in a gown that felt like chains, forced to marry a man whose touch made me shiver, not with love, but with fear. The words echoed in Aurelia Brown's mind with every step she took toward Magnus Hale, the billionaire her father had bound her to. The guests whispered, some in awe of his fortune, others in pity for her trembling hands. To them, this was a spectacle of wealth. To her, it was a cage. Her lips formed a practiced smile, but her heart hammered like a trapped bird. She had no choice. Her father's debts had devoured every option, and this marriage was the only way to keep her family from ruin. Magnus didn't even pretend. He stood waiting in his perfectly cut suit, his expression carved in stone, eyes cold, his posture commanding. When his hand brushed hers at the altar, she flinched. It wasn't affection, it was ownership. "Do you, Aurelia Brown, take Magnus Hale to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her throat tightened. Every muscle screamed to say no, but her father's pleading eyes from the front row sealed her fate. "I do," she whispered, her voice breaking. The applause that followed felt cruel, each clap a reminder of the life she'd lost. Many have felt trapped in choices they never wanted but couldn't escape. Some by family, some by fear, some by circumstances too heavy to carry alone. Aurelia knew this wasn't love. It was survival. But what she didn't know, what no one in that chapel knew, was that Magnus Hale carried a secret so heavy, so dangerous, it would tear apart everything she thought she understood about him. He wasn't cold because he couldn't love. He was cold because he had already given his love to someone else. Have you ever felt forced into a choice that changed your life forever? Comment below. I want to hear your story. Aurelia's wedding day was only the beginning. The mansion she stepped into wasn't a home but a fortress, filled with silence, shadows, and unspoken rules. Magnus treated her with politeness, never cruelty, but never tenderness either. She told herself she could endure it, that one day she'd find a way to breathe again. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next. One night, following a trail of whispers and unanswered questions, she found herself standing outside a hidden house. Through the thin curtains, she saw him, the same man who could barely look at her, smiling warmly at another woman. His hand lingered on her shoulder as though it belonged there. And then the child appeared. A little boy with Magnus's eyes. "Daddy," he laughed, climbing into his arms. Aurelia's world shattered in that instant. She had been forced into a marriage built on lies. Now she faced an impossible question. Would she endure a marriage bound by secrets, or walk away, no matter the cost? Before we go further into Aurelia's story, don't forget to subscribe to 20 Rich Billionaires romance stories, so you never miss another tale like this. Like, share, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Aurelia's place? Aurelia Brown had never known the glittering world of the wealthy. Her life began in the warmth of Atlanta's South Side, where her family owned a small diner with a flickering neon sign that barely worked. The place smelled of fried chicken and sweet cornbread, her mother's recipes written on grease-stained index cards. The diner was more than food, it was their survival. Aurelia spent her teenage years wiping down counters after school, serving coffee to truck drivers at dawn, and watching her father try to stretch every dollar just to keep the lights on. They weren't rich, but they had love. That love made the tiny rooms of their apartment feel like enough. But love didn't pay bills, and when the debts piled high, collectors started calling. Her father, once proud and strong, began to slump under the weight. Aurelia would catch him staring at overdue notices late at night, shoulders shaking as though he could hold the world together if he just tried harder. The diner slipped further. Loans were taken, promises made. By the time Aurelia turned 20, the debt wasn't just heavy, it was crushing. It was in this storm that Magnus Hale entered their lives. Magnus wasn't a man who asked, he was a man who decided. A billionaire real estate mogul who saw life as transactions, not relationships. When Aurelia's father begged him for a final extension on the loans, Magnus didn't raise his voice or slam his fist. He only leaned back in his leather chair, his gaze cool, his words precise. There will be no extensions. Either the diner becomes mine, or your daughter does. Aurelia's father froze, eyes wide with disbelief. You can't mean… Magnus cut him off. Marriage. She becomes my wife. Your debt is cleared. The demand hung in the air, sharp and merciless. To Magnus it was simple. To Aurelia's father it was salvation wrapped in humiliation. He agreed before Aurelia even had the chance to breathe. When her father broke the news, Aurelia felt her blood turn cold. You promised me to him? Her voice cracked, torn between anger and despair. Her father gripped her hands. I had no choice, Aurelia. It was this, or lose everything. I'm sorry. Sorry I didn't undo the sentence. Sorry didn't change the fact that Aurelia's life had been sold like an asset. The day of the wedding arrived with heavy skies and a church filled with whispers. Aurelia wore a white gown chosen not for her, but for appearances. Lace scratched against her skin as though mocking her. Each step toward the altar felt like walking deeper into a prison. Her father stood at her side, his face pale, his hand trembling against hers. Be strong, he whispered, though the guilt in his eyes said more than the words. When the doors opened, every head turned. Aurelia forced a smile, but her lips trembled. She could feel their eyes, some envious, others pitying, as though they already knew this wasn't love. And there he was. Magnus Hale, tall and sharp in a tailored suit, stood at the altar like a statue carved from ice. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. His stare was unwavering, as though he were closing a business deal, not gaining a bride. Aurelia's hands were cold as she reached him. When his fingers brushed hers, the shiver that ran through her wasn't desire. It was fear. The pastor's words blurred. Aurelia's thoughts screamed for escape, but her father's debt shackled her feet. Do you, Aurelia Brown, take Magnus Hale to be your lawfully wedded husband? Her chest tightened, her lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then she saw her father sitting in the front pew, his eyes pleading, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the bench. Aurelia's voice finally broke free, soft and hollow. I do. The applause that followed felt cruel, echoing like laughter at her misery. The guests smiled, but Aurelia's heart sank deeper into a cage she hadn't chosen. When Magnus leaned closer, whispering, You belong to me now, the words sliced through her. He didn't mean it as a vow, he meant it as a claim. That night, lying in a bed too big, in a mansion too cold, Aurelia whispered to herself the truth she could no longer deny. This is not love, this is survival. Aurelia's story was never about a fairy tale. It was about sacrifice, duty, and a choice that wasn't hers to make. She had been forced into a life built on debt and silence. But within her heart, something stirred, a fragile ember of strength, because strength doesn't always come from freedom. Sometimes, it comes from how we rise when life drags us into chains we never asked for. Aurelia didn't yet know the battles ahead, or the secrets that would break her world apart. But she knew one thing: though she had been pushed into this cage, she would not let it define her spirit forever. The glass mansion stretched across the city's skyline, a fortress of steel and marble. From the outside, it was breathtaking, a symbol of power that whispered wealth with every glittering surface. But to Aurelia, stepping through its massive doors for the first time, it felt more like a museum than a home. The ceilings soared too high, the chandeliers sparkled too bright, and every room echoed when she spoke, as if mocking her solitude. Servants moved quietly, their eyes cast down, never lingering long enough to offer company. Dinner was served on a table so long that Aurelia's voice felt lost trying to carry across it. She wandered through hallways lined with portraits of people she didn't know, rooms filled with furniture too perfect to touch. The garden was manicured to flawlessness, yet lacked the messy living beauty of her mother's small potted plants back home. At night, Aurelia sat on the edge of her massive bed, staring at the city lights blinking far below. The silence pressed against her chest until she thought it would crush her. She longed for the sound of clinking dishes at her family's diner, the hum of voices filling the room, the smell of coffee brewing. Instead, all she had was emptiness dressed in luxury. The mansion was beautiful, yes, but beauty without warmth was nothing more than a gilded cage. Magnus was always polite. He opened doors, greeted her with a nod, and never raised his voice. Yet there was nothing tender in his gestures. His words were clipped, rehearsed, the kind one used with colleagues, not a wife. "Dinner is at 7, he would say, his eyes already drifting to his phone. "I'll be out late. Don't wait up." His world seemed to revolve around endless business meetings. Morning, noon, night. He was gone. Sometimes she'd hear the purr of his car pulling into the driveway near midnight, but by the time she stepped into the hall, he was already locked away in his study. On the rare evenings they sat across from each other at dinner, the silence was heavier than the silver cutlery laid neatly beside their plates. Aurelia would try to start a conversation, ask about his day, his work, even the weather, but his answers were short, his eyes distant. Fine. Profitable. Nothing of concern. The wall between them grew higher with every exchange, built not from cruelty, but from indifference. Magnus wasn't unkind. He simply wasn't there, not in the way a husband should be. The mansion, already silent, grew colder with his absence, and Aurelia began to wonder if she existed in his life at all, or if she was merely a signature on paper, a solution to a debt he'd taken ownership of. Loneliness seeped into Aurelia's bones. Days stretched endlessly, marked by the ticking of the grand clock in the foyer. She tried to fill the time, reading in the library, sketching in the sunroom, wandering the garden paths, but no matter where she went, the emptiness followed. The servants bowed when she passed but never spoke beyond necessity. She could feel their eyes on her, questioning silently why she was there, what role she played in Magnus Hale's immaculate world. Nights were the hardest. She lay awake in a bed far too large, her thoughts racing. Did Magnus ever regret binding her to him? Did he even think of her as his wife, or was she simply a placeholder until he grew bored? Self-doubt gnawed at her. Maybe she wasn't beautiful enough to catch his gaze. Maybe she wasn't refined enough to fit into his world of polished wealth and flawless manners. She thought of Alara, though she didn't yet know her name, imagining a woman who could have earned his warmth. The thought made her chest ache. Aurelia tried to remind herself of her worth, of the girl who once dreamed of becoming more than her father's burden. But in the silence of that mansion, her own voice often felt too faint to believe. And yet, there were moments, small, fleeting, almost invisible, but they unsettled her more than his coldness ever did. One evening she cut her hand on a shard of glass after knocking over a vase. Before she could even call for help, Magnus appeared, his usually impassive face tightened with concern. He took her hand gently, wrapping it in a cloth himself. His touch was firm but careful, his eyes focused solely on her. "Be more careful," he murmured, almost like a plea rather than a command. Another night when she wandered into the study, she caught him staring at an old photograph on his desk. He didn't notice her at first. His jaw was clenched, his eyes uncharacteristically soft, as though the picture carried a memory he couldn't let go. When he finally realized she was there, he slid the photo away quickly, his mask returning in an instant. These subtle flickers of something human, something tender, left Aurelia more confused than ever. They hinted at a man buried beneath the billionaire's armor, a man capable of more than icy indifference. But each glimpse disappeared as quickly as it came, leaving Aurelia questioning whether she had imagined it at all. Aurelia soon realized that the mansion, for all its grandeur, was nothing more than a shell, Gold walls couldn't comfort her, marble floors couldn't hold her, and chandeliers couldn't brighten the darkness in her heart. Magnus had given her everything material, a mansion, wealth, security, but he hadn't given her the one thing that mattered most, warmth. And as she walked alone through the echoing halls, Aurelia whispered to herself the lesson that burned deep into her soul. Wealth without warmth is meaningless, because a home is not built from walls or riches. A home is built from love, from laughter, from kindness. And in this cold mansion, Aurelia had none. The mansion's silence had become something Aurelia almost grew used to, but that night it was broken by a low murmur seeping through the closed study door. She paused on the staircase, her bare feet cold against the marble floor, her breath catching when she recognized the voice. Magnus. His tone was different, softer, stripped of the clipped, business-like edge he always used with her. Yes. I'll make time soon. A pause. Then the words that froze Aurelia in place. I miss you too. Her stomach knotted. The words replayed in her head like a cruel echo. I miss you too. She pressed her palm against the railing, nails digging into the polished wood. Who was on the other end of that call? Who was he missing? It wasn't her. He had never said those words to her, not even close. The door clicked shut tighter, his voice lowering into whispers she couldn't make out. But she had already heard enough. A cold rush of air swept through her chest, leaving her numb. For the first time, Aurelia realized the distance between them wasn't just coldness. It was occupied by someone else. She slipped back upstairs, each step heavier than the last. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the shadows. The doubts that had quietly whispered at the edges of her mind now screamed louder. Every business trip, every late-night meeting, every moment he had pulled away instead of leaning closer, it all took on new meaning. Was it her fault? Was she not enough to hold his attention? Or had there always been another woman, long before she was forced into his life? Her chest ached, her breath unsteady. Tears blurred her vision, but she wiped them away quickly, unwilling to give them power. Yet the hurt carved deep, leaving her with a hollow ache. She wanted to confront him, to demand the truth. But fear held her back. What if he admitted it? What if the life she was enduring wasn't just cold but built entirely on lies? Heartbreak gnawed at her in silence, turning the walls of the mansion into mirrors of her own doubt. Later that night, long after she heard the study door open and his footsteps echo down the hall, Aurelia lay awake, her back turned toward the door. She expected him to pass by as he always did. Instead, the door creaked open, and the faint scent of his cologne drifted into the room. Aurelia, his voice was low, almost uncertain. She didn't move. She didn't trust her voice not to break. The mattress dipped slightly as he sat beside her. For the first time since their wedding, he reached out, not with the cold finality of ownership, but with hesitation. His fingers brushed against hers, tentative, as though unsure if he had the right. Her breath hitched. The warmth of his hand sent a confusing rush through her body. She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. For once, they weren't unreadable. They carried something she couldn't name. Loneliness maybe, or a quiet plea she didn't understand. He leaned closer, his lips brushing hers in the faintest kiss. More a question than a claim. It should have been what she longed for, yet her mind betrayed her, replaying the words she had overheard. I miss you too. Aurelia's heart warred within her chest. Part of her ached to believe this was a turning point, that Magnus was finally reaching out, finally allowing her into a place beyond the cold exterior. The flickers of softness she had glimpsed before now seemed to bloom into something tangible. But the other part of her bled with betrayal. How could she welcome his touch when she knew his affection was not hers alone? Was this tenderness genuine, or was it guilt spilling over from a life she wasn't meant to know about? His lips lingered against hers, but Aurelia didn't lean forward. She froze, torn between leaning into hope or recoiling from lies. Magnus pulled back slightly, his gaze searching hers. For the first time, his mask slipped enough for her to see a man struggling. Not the untouchable billionaire, but someone carrying wounds she couldn't yet name. Her voice trembled when she finally whispered, "Why now?" He didn't answer. Instead, he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand resting briefly on her cheek, before he rose and left the room without another word. The silence he left behind was louder than ever. As Aurelia lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts circled endlessly. His call, his tenderness, the contradiction of it all. And then the truth settled in like a weight on her chest. Magnus wasn't heartless. He was wounded. Whatever he carried from his past, whatever scars made him keep her at a distance, also drove him to cling to another life behind closed doors. People often hide their wounds with double lives, pretending to be strong while secretly bleeding where no one can see. Magnus's double life wasn't only betrayal, it was the mark of a man unable to face what hurt him most. For Aurelia, the lesson was cruel but clear. Sometimes, what looks like indifference is really a mask for brokenness. And when those wounds stay hidden, they drive people to split themselves in two, one life for the world, and another for the secrets they cannot let go. The shift began subtly, so subtly that Aurelia wondered at first if she imagined it. Magnus, who usually moved through their life like a ghost tethered only to work, began appearing at the breakfast table. One morning she walked into the kitchen expecting her usual solitude, only to find him already seated, the newspaper folded neatly beside his plate. His gaze lifted when she entered. "Sit," he said simply, but his voice carried a gentleness it hadn't before. The staff hurried to serve eggs, toast, and coffee, but Magnus surprised her by nudging a plate toward her himself. "You hardly eat," he murmured. "Try." Aurelia blinked, the unfamiliar kindness leaving her silent. She ate in small bites, every glance at him carrying 1,000 questions. Why now? What has changed? Then came the diner visit. Weeks later, on a quiet afternoon, Magnus appeared at her door. "Come with me." She hesitated, confused by the rare request, but followed. To her astonishment, his black car stopped not at another towering building or luxury hall, but at the corner where her family's diner stood. The sign flickered weakly as always, and the familiar smell of fried chicken wafted through the air. Her breath caught. "Why are we here?" Magnus's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Because this is where you came from. I wanted to see it." Inside, her father greeted them nervously, wiping his hands on his apron. For once, Magnus didn't carry the air of a billionaire surveying an asset. He sat at the counter, ordered a simple cup of coffee, and listened while Aurelia told stories of working the floor as a girl. Her laughter filled the room, surprising even her. And when she looked at Magnus, she swore she saw something soften in his eyes, something that wasn't pity or calculation, but admiration. That night, back at the mansion, he stayed in the living room with her long after dinner, listening as she talked about her mother's recipes and the dreams she once had. For the first time, he spoke about himself, not contracts or acquisitions, but childhood memories, his strict father, and the loneliness of growing up in a house where affection was scarce. It wasn't much, but it was something. A door cracked open, letting her glimpse a side of Magnus she'd never known existed. The turning point came one evening when winter's chill pressed against the windows. A fire roared in the grand fireplace, flames flickering gold across the marble floor. Aurelia sat curled in an armchair, her knees drawn to her chest, lost in thought. Magnus entered quietly, setting down a glass of wine on the table beside her. "You're too quiet," he said, lowering himself into the chair across from her. She shrugged, her eyes on the flames. "There isn't much to say." For a moment, silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the heavy silence of before. It was different, tentative, waiting. Magnus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You think I don't notice, but I see it, the way you try, the way you endure this marriage I forced on you." Her chest tightened. She turned her gaze to him, surprised by the rawness in his voice. "I don't deserve you," he admitted, his voice lower now, almost broken. "I thought I could bring you here, keep you safe, and that would be enough. But it isn't. I've been unfair." Aurelia's breath caught. She had never heard him speak this way. Vulnerability wasn't in his nature, yet here he was, stripped of the armor he wore so well. She whispered, "Then why keep me here at all?" His jaw tightened, and for once, he didn't have an answer ready. Instead, he moved from his chair to sit beside her. His hand reached out, hesitant, before resting lightly on hers. His touch wasn't ownership this time. It was a question. The fire crackled as Aurelia felt her heartbeat quicken. For the first time, she didn't pull away. She let his warmth settle over her, a fragile peace blooming in the space between them. When he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers, it wasn't cold or calculated. It was hesitant, tender, almost reverent. And for the first time, Aurelia didn't think of chains. She thought of the possibility. The days that followed were unlike any Aurelia had known since the wedding. Magnus began rising earlier, sharing coffee with her at the kitchen table. They spoke more, about simple things, about books she was reading, about the view from the balcony in the mornings. He walked with her in the garden, their conversations flowing more easily. Sometimes he made her laugh, an awkward attempt at humor that she had never imagined him capable of. One evening, as they cooked together in the kitchen, Aurelia found herself smiling without realizing it. Flour dusted her fingers as she kneaded dough, and Magnus, watching from across the counter, reached over to tuck a stray curl of hair behind her ear. Her cheeks warmed under his gaze. For once, it wasn't filled with detachment. It was filled with something gentler, something she was afraid to name. The memory of that phone call, "I miss you too," still haunts her. But each gesture, each crack in his cold exterior, made her question what was real. Could she truly believe that this man, broken and distant, was capable of change? Late one night, as they sat side by the fire once more, Magnus's arm brushed against hers. She didn't move away. Instead, she leaned closer, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. His body stiffened at first, but then he relaxed, his hand covering hers. For the first time since their wedding day, Aurelia allowed herself to believe that love might be possible. As Aurelia lay in bed that night, staring into the dark, her mind replayed the moments. His hand on hers, his words by the fire, the small glimpses of the man beneath the armor. She realized something profound. Strength wasn't only in walls and silence. Sometimes, strength comes in lowering those walls, in admitting weakness, in showing the wounds we try so hard to hide. Magnus, for all his power, had revealed his deepest truth in one simple line: "Kate, I don't deserve you." And in that vulnerability, a crack had formed in the coldness that once separated them. It was in those cracks that love could begin to grow. Aurelia wasn't naive. She knew the shadows of his secrets still lingered. But she also knew that vulnerability was the soil where something real could take root. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Before the story moves further, Aurelia's voice softens into the silence, as though turning not only to Magnus, but to those listening. Do you think someone cold and distant can truly change when love enters their life? Tell me what you believe. Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to Meet Rich Billionaires Romance Stories, so you don't miss what happens next. It started with another late night. Magnus had told her he'd be in meetings, his usual excuse, but something in his eyes had shifted when he said it. Aurelia sensed it. A hesitation, almost like guilt. That evening, when he left the mansion, she didn't stay behind as she usually did. She slipped into a coat, pulled the hood low, and called a cab. Her heart pounded as the car followed the black sedan carrying her husband through the city streets. The cab stopped in a quieter part of town. Magnus's car slowed in front of a modest house tucked behind tall hedges. Aurelia's breath caught as she leaned forward. He wasn't going to the office. He wasn't meeting investors. She paid the driver quickly and slipped out, hiding in the shadows of the street. Her chest tightened as Magnus walked up the short path to the door. He didn't knock. He opened it with ease, as though he belonged there. Through the half-drawn curtains, Aurelia saw her world splinter. Inside stood a woman, slender, graceful, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. She greeted Magnus with a smile, one he returned softly, softer than Aurelia had ever seen. Then a boy ran into the room. Aurelia's breath hitched. The child couldn't have been more than 5. His eyes, sharp and clear, were Magnus's eyes. His features mirrored his father's so perfectly that Aurelia's knees nearly buckled. The boy launched himself into Magnus's arms. "Daddy!" Magnus laughed, a sound Aurelia had never heard directed at her. He held the boy close, ruffling his hair, pride and joy lighting his face. Aurelia's fingers dug into the railing where she clung for balance, her stomach twisted. Every cold silence, every night he turned away from her, now had an answer. She wasn't the only one in his life. She wasn't even the first. Her world collapsed at that moment. The truth crashed into her chest like a blow she couldn't breathe through. Magnus Hale, the man she was forced to marry, the man who had begun to show her glimpses of tenderness, had a secret family. Every flicker of warmth he'd shown her, every word by the fireplace, every touch she dared to believe in, it all felt like a lie now. A mask he wore while his real love, his real life, existed here in this hidden house. Aurelia pressed her trembling hand to her mouth, fighting to keep from crying out. Her body shook as the boy tugged on Magnus's sleeve, showing him a toy car with the eager delight only a child could hold. Magnus crouched down, listening with rapt attention, his face soft, his eyes alive. It was everything Aurelia had longed for, everything she had begged for in silence, but he had given it to someone else. Tears blurred her vision. Her chest heaved with quiet sobs, but she stayed rooted in place, unable to tear her eyes away. Each second was another knife cutting deeper, stripping away the fragile hope she had allowed herself to feel. Her marriage wasn't only loveless, it was a shadow. She wasn't his partner, she was his cover. By the time Magnus returned to the mansion that night, Aurelia was waiting. She sat in the living room, her back straight, her eyes burning though her face remained calm. He stepped through the door, his coat still on, his tie loosened. He stopped when he saw her, his expression flickering with surprise, before hardening back into neutrality. "You're awake," he said evenly. Aurelia rose slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. Her voice shook, but her words were sharp. "Where were you, Magnus? And don't tell me it was business. I followed you." For the first time his mask cracked. His jaw tightened, and silence hung heavy between them. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "Who is she? The woman in that house? And the boy?" Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "The boy who looks exactly like you, who calls you Daddy." Magnus's silence was louder than any confession. His lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. He only lowered his gaze, his hand flexing at his side, and in that moment, Aurelia had her answer. Her chest tightened as the reality sank deeper. His refusal to deny it wasn't an act of mercy, it was an admission. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "I was never truly your wife." "Was I?" Magnus's head lifted, his eyes pained, but still he said nothing, and that silence, more than lies, shattered her completely. Aurelia turned away, her voice trembling as she spoke the truth that weighed heavy on her heart. "You thought you could hide this from me, that I'd never see, that I'd accept the coldness and never ask why." She shook her head, her tears falling freely. "But secrets don't stay buried. They rot everything they touch." She faced him again, her voice firm despite the tears. "You may have built your empire on control, Magnus, but no empire survives lies. Secrets may protect you for a while, but they destroy the one thing that makes love possible, trust." He flinched at the word, his jaw tightening, but she pressed on. "You destroyed whatever chance we had before it could even begin, and I don't know if there's a way back from this." The silence that followed was unbearable. The mansion, vast and gleaming, felt emptier than ever. That night, Aurelia understood the truth in a way she never had before. It wasn't money, or promises, or even marriage vows that built love. It was trust, and without it, everything else crumbled into dust. It started with another late night. Magnus had told her he'd be in meetings, his usual excuse, but something in his eyes had shifted when he said it. Aurelia sensed it. A hesitation, almost like guilt. That evening, when he left the mansion, she didn't stay behind as she usually did. She slipped into a coat, pulled the hood low, and called a cab. Her heart pounded as the car followed the black sedan carrying her husband through the city streets. The cab stopped in a quieter part of town. Magnus's car slowed in front of a modest house tucked behind tall hedges. Aurelia's breath caught as she leaned forward. He wasn't going to the office. He wasn't meeting investors. She paid the driver quickly and slipped out, hiding in the shadows of the street. Her chest tightened as Magnus walked up the short path to the door. He didn't knock. He opened it with ease, as though he belonged there. Through the half-drawn curtains, Aurelia saw her world splinter. Inside stood a woman, slender, graceful, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. She greeted Magnus with a smile, one he returned softly, softer than Aurelia had ever seen. Then a boy ran into the room. Aurelia's breath hitched. The child couldn't have been more than 5. His eyes, sharp and clear, were Magnus's eyes. His features mirrored his father's so perfectly that Aurelia's knees nearly buckled. The boy launched himself into Magnus's arms. "Daddy!" Magnus laughed, a sound Aurelia had never heard directed at her. He held the boy close, ruffling his hair, pride and joy lighting his face. Aurelia's fingers dug into the railing where she clung for balance, her stomach twisted. Every cold silence, every night he turned away from her, now had an answer. She wasn't the only one in his life. She wasn't even the first. Her world collapsed at that moment. The truth crashed into her chest like a blow she couldn't breathe through. Magnus Hale, the man she was forced to marry, the man who had begun to show her glimpses of tenderness, had a secret family. Every flicker of warmth he'd shown her, every word by the fireplace, every touch she dared to believe in, it all felt like a lie now. A mask he wore while his real love, his real life, existed here in this hidden house. Aurelia pressed her trembling hand to her mouth, fighting to keep from crying out. Her body shook as the boy tugged on Magnus's sleeve, showing him a toy car with the eager delight only a child could hold. Magnus crouched down, listening with rapt attention, his face soft, his eyes alive. It was everything Aurelia had longed for, everything she had begged for in silence, but he had given it to someone else. Tears blurred her vision. Her chest heaved with quiet sobs, but she stayed rooted in place, unable to tear her eyes away. Each second was another knife cutting deeper, stripping away the fragile hope she had allowed herself to feel. By the time Magnus returned to the mansion that night, Aurelia was waiting. She sat in the living room, her back straight, her eyes burning though her face remained calm. He stepped through the door, his coat still on, his tie loosened. He stopped when he saw her, his expression flickering with surprise, before hardening back into neutrality. "You're awake," he said evenly. Aurelia rose slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. Her voice shook, but her words were sharp. "Where were you, Magnus? And don't tell me it was business. I followed you." For the first time his mask cracked. His jaw tightened, and silence hung heavy between them. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "Who is she? The woman in that house? And the boy?" Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "The boy who looks exactly like you. Who calls you Daddy." Magnus's silence was louder than any confession. His lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. He only lowered his gaze, his hand flexing at his side, and in that moment, Aurelia had her answer. Her chest tightened as the reality sank deeper. His refusal to deny it wasn't an act of mercy. It was an admission. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "I was never truly your wife." "Was I?" Magnus's head lifted, his eyes pained, but still he said nothing, and that silence, more than lies, shattered her completely. Aurelia turned away, her voice trembling as she spoke the truth that weighed heavy on her heart. "You thought you could hide this from me, that I'd never see, that I'd accept the coldness and never ask why." She shook her head, her tears falling freely. "But secrets don't stay buried. They rot everything they touch." She faced him again, her voice firm despite the tears. "You may have built your empire on control, Magnus, but no empire survives lies. Secrets may protect you for a while, but they destroy the one thing that makes love possible: trust." He flinched at the word, his jaw tightening, but she pressed on. "You destroyed whatever chance we had before it could even begin, and I don't know if there's a way back from this." The silence that followed was unbearable. The mansion, vast and gleaming, felt emptier than ever. That night, Aurelia understood the truth in a way she never had before. It wasn't money, or promises, or even marriage vows that built love. It was trust. And without it, everything else crumbled into dust. The air in the living room felt suffocating. Aurelia stood with her arms wrapped around herself, trembling, her eyes still burning from tears. Magnus lingered near the fireplace, his face in shadow, his posture rigid. For long minutes he said nothing. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. Finally his voice broke through, rougher than she had ever heard it. "Her name is Alara." Aurelia's breath hitched. The name settled heavily in the room. Magnus continued, his jaw tight. "She was my first love, long before business consumed me, long before this marriage. We were together for years. She was everything I thought I couldn't have and still succeed in this world." His eyes flicked to Aurelia, then away again, unable to hold her gaze. "But when I chose my empire, I left her behind. I thought it was over. I thought I could bury that part of me." He exhaled shakily, his hand pressing against the mantel. But then came Theo. The boy's name cracked Aurelia's heart further. "My son," Magnus whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know about him until years later. Alara raised him on her own, kept him hidden from me until she couldn't anymore. When I found out, I swore I'd never abandon him again. That house, that life, it's where my son knows me as his father. I couldn't take that away from him." Aurelia's knees weakened. She sank onto the couch, her mind spinning. The truth she had dreaded was worse than she imagined. Magnus hadn't simply betrayed her. He had a whole life tied to another woman. And it wasn't only about Alara. It was about a child. A boy who had no fault in any of this. Magnus turned toward her then, and for the first time, she saw guilt carved into every line of his face. The mask he wore so well was gone. "I never meant for you to find out this way," he said quietly. "I thought if I kept it hidden, I could protect you. Protect Theo, protect everyone. But hiding the truth has done more damage than I ever intended." He dragged a hand over his face, his shoulders slumping, the weight of years pressing down on him. "I lived 2 lives, Aurelia, and each one feels like it's killing me. With Alara, I see the family I lost. With you, I see the chance at a life I don't deserve. I thought I could balance it, but I was wrong." His voice broke, raw with something Aurelia never expected to hear: fear. "I'm afraid, Aurelia, afraid of losing my son, afraid of losing you, afraid that no matter what I do, I'll destroy everything." The words stunned her. She had always seen Magnus as unshakable, untouchable, a man of stone. But here he was, stripped bare, showing her the cracks he had buried beneath years of power and control. For the first time, Aurelia realized that his coldness wasn't only arrogance, it was armor forged from guilt and fear. Aurelia's heart ached as she listened. The fury inside her screamed that he had betrayed her, that he had stolen her choice, stolen her trust, and chained her to a life built on lies. But another part of her, the part that had seen the fleeting tenderness in his touch, the vulnerability by the fireplace, the flickers of warmth, saw the man beneath the mask. A man burdened by choices he couldn't undo. A man trying and failing to live two lives at once. Her voice trembled as she finally spoke. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? You forced me into this marriage, made me feel invisible in your world. And now I know why. Because your heart was never here with me. It was with them." Magnus's eyes met hers, pained, but he didn't interrupt. She continued, her words breaking into sobs. "I wanted to believe in you, Magnus. I wanted to believe that maybe there was something real between us. But how can I love a man who lives a lie? How can I build a life on nothing but secrets?" Her tears fell freely now, her chest heaving as she poured out the truth she had been holding inside. Yet beneath the heartbreak was a pull she couldn't ignore. The sight of his pain, his raw honesty, stirred something she didn't want to admit. Magnus stepped closer, his voice low, trembling. "I can't change what I've done. I can't erase the past. But Aurelia, I don't want to lose you. You've shown me a part of myself I thought was gone. If there's even the smallest chance, I want to try. With you." Her heart twisted. She wanted to hate him, but his humanity made it impossible to see him as only a villain. He was broken, and in some cruel way, that brokenness called to hers. That night, Aurelia lay awake long after Magnus left the room, his confession echoing in her mind. She had learned something she would never forget. Love was impossible without trust. Trust was the foundation, the soil, the roots. Without it, everything else withered. Magnus could confess his guilt. He could show his fear. He could even offer her his fragile humanity. But none of it erased the cracks his lies had carved into their marriage. As she stared at the ceiling, her tears drying on her cheeks, she whispered to herself, "Love can't live in the shadows. It needs truth, or it crumbles." The mansion felt colder than ever. And though Aurelia's heart still pulled toward Magnus's brokenness, she knew the path forward would not be easy. Because love without trust was nothing more than another kind of chain. The mansion's silence pressed down on Aurelia like never before. After Magnus's confession, she couldn't escape the storm inside her. Her heart was torn in two directions, and every step echoed the question she couldn't yet answer: should I stay, or should I leave? When she walked through the endless halls, she thought of freedom, of packing her few belongings and walking out the towering doors to reclaim her life. But then she would stop, frozen by another thought. What would leaving mean for her father, for her family, for herself, when she was still tied legally and financially to a man whose shadow stretched across the city? At night, lying awake, she imagined both futures, one where she left, never to look back, free but alone, another where she stayed, bound to a man she no longer trusted, yet still drawn to. Her heart ached as she replayed his words, his eyes full of guilt and fear. Part of her wanted to believe he could change, that the man she glimpsed by the fireplace, the one who said he didn't deserve her, was real. But the pain of betrayal still throbbed like a fresh wound. Every breath, every thought was a battle. Stay or go, forgive or walk away. The pressure wasn't hers alone. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, the same voice that had begged her to accept Magnus in the first place. "We had no choice, Aurelia. He saved us from ruin." Her father's relief after the marriage had been almost unbearable to watch. If she left Magnus, what would it mean for her family's security? Would debts return to crush them once more? The weight of their dependence pressed heavily on her shoulders, but her own freedom whispered louder with each passing day. She remembered the girl she once was, dreaming of a life outside the diner, dreaming of love that would lift her, instead of chains that dragged her down. Leaving would mean taking her life back, proving she was more than a bargain struck over debts. Yet her heart, foolish and fragile, betrayed her. Against her will, it still pulled toward Magnus, toward the moments where he let her see the man beneath the armor, toward the tenderness he had shown when he confessed, "I don't deserve you." Freedom meant cutting him off. Family meant staying. Her heart meant risking everything again. The conflict raged within her, tearing her apart. Days passed in silence, until Aurelia finally made her decision. She found Magnus in his study late one evening, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. She stood tall, though her hands trembled at her sides. "I've made my choice." His eyes darkened, bracing for the blow he expected, but her words cut a different path. "I will stay," she said softly, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. "But only under one condition." Magnus rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "Name it." Aurelia met his gaze without flinching. "If we are to continue, everything must be on the table. No more secrets, no more lies. If you want me here, you owe me the truth about everything. Your past, your son, your feelings, all of it. I can't build a life with shadows. I need honesty. Complete honesty." The silence stretched as Magnus studied her, his jaw tightening. Then for the first time he nodded, not with the authority of a man making a deal, but with the humility of a man accepting terms he knew he had to honor. "You have my word," he said quietly. Aurelia exhaled, her chest loosening slightly. The decision wasn't easy. Staying didn't erase the pain, but demanding honesty gave her power she hadn't had before. This time, the choice was hers. Her words hung in the room, stronger than she realized. "If we are to continue, everything must be on the table." It wasn't just an ultimatum. It was a line in the sand, a declaration that she would no longer live as the silent, powerless bride who endured whatever was given. She had chosen to stay, yes, but she had chosen on her terms. And those terms demanded respect, demanded truth, demanded a foundation she could finally stand on without crumbling. The line marked the difference between the woman she had been, trapped in a gown that felt like chains, and the woman she was becoming, one who refused to settle for half-truths and hidden lives. Magnus understood it too. His silence wasn't resisted this time, it was an agreement, and it told Aurelia more than words ever could. He knew he had to change, or risk losing her forever. That night, as Aurelia sat alone in her room, she let her decision settle into her bones. She knew forgiveness was not instant. It wasn't a single choice made in a single moment. It was a process, one that needed boundaries strong enough to protect her heart. She whispered the truth to herself, steady and certain. Forgiveness requires new boundaries and respect. Without them, it isn't forgiveness, it's surrender. She would not surrender again. If Magnus truly wanted her, if he truly wanted a chance at love, he would have to meet her where she stood, in the light, not in the shadows. And though her heart still ached, though the future was uncertain, Aurelia felt a shift within her. For the first time since the wedding, she wasn't only surviving, she was choosing, and that choice gave her a strength Magnus Hale could no longer ignore. The decision to reclaim her life didn't come overnight, but when it did, Aurelia knew exactly where to begin. She returned to the heart of her past, the small diner her parents once poured their dreams into. The building had aged, the neon sign still flickered, the paint had peeled, and the booths looked tired. But to Aurelia, it was more than wood and tile. It was a foundation, a symbol of where she came from, and the reminder that she could create something of her own, not something forced on her. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Days blurred into nights as she oversaw repairs, hired cooks, and reimagined the menu. She wasn't just reopening a diner, she was rebuilding her family's legacy. When the doors opened, the line stretched out to the street. Former customers returned, eager for the comfort food they remembered, while newcomers arrived, curious about the young woman who had revived an old treasure. Word spread quickly, not just about the food, but about Aurelia herself. The woman who had endured, who had chosen to fight for her future. Within a year, one diner turned into 3. Within 3 years, her brand expanded across the state. What began as a flicker of hope grew into a thriving chain, a testament to her determination and her refusal to be defined by anyone's shadow. Aurelia stood at the grand opening of her 5th location, scissors in hand, the cameras flashing. As the ribbon fell away, she realized she had built more than a business. She had built proof that she was more than her marriage, more than her pain, more than her past. As her business flourished, so did her voice. Reporters sought her out, eager to hear the story behind the woman who transformed a failing diner into a regional brand. At first, Aurelia hesitated, but she soon realized that her voice could carry further than she ever imagined. She began giving interviews, not just about food or business, but about strength. She spoke of the nights she felt powerless, of the choices she didn't want but was forced to make, and of the courage it took to carve her own path. Her story resonated. Women wrote letters saying they found hope in her words. Young men thanked her for reminding them of the strength of their mothers and sisters. The diner chain was no longer just about food. It became a symbol of resilience, a gathering place where people felt part of something bigger. Aurelia accepted invitations to speak at universities, business conferences, and community centers. She stood tall behind microphones, her voice steady, her words carrying the weight of lived truth. "I was once a woman trapped in silence," she told one audience. "But silence is not survival. Finding your voice, building your future on your own terms, that is survival." Applause filled the rooms wherever she went, not because she was flawless, but because she was honest. And with each speech, each headline, Aurelia stepped further into her own independence. Through it all, Magnus remained by her side, but this time not as the cold figure who once dictated her life. Instead, he chose to support her openly, with pride instead of control. He attended her diner openings, standing beside her while photographers captured the moment. He introduced her at events, not as his wife but as a leader, a builder, a force in her own right. In private, he admitted how much she had changed him. "You've shown me more than boardrooms ever could," he told her one evening as they walked through the bustling kitchen of one of her diners. "You've taught me what it means to stand beside someone, not above them." Aurelia, once unsure of his love, now saw the shift in his actions. He no longer tried to shield her with silence. He didn't hide his past. Instead, he stood in the light with her, allowing her to shine even brighter than him. The man who once lived 2 lives now gave his presence fully to one, and it was the life they were building together. But Aurelia's triumphs were never credited to him. She had fought for them herself, and Magnus finally respected that truth. Looking back at her journey, Aurelia understood the lesson with clarity. Love wasn't about chains, or silence, or surrendering who you were to keep another person close. True love means finding your own voice and never losing it, even in the arms of someone else. She stood at the front of her newest diner one evening, watching families gather at tables, hearing laughter fill the air, the smell of her mother's recipes alive once again. Magnus sat quietly at one corner booth, pride in his eyes as he watched her speak to customers and employees alike. In that moment, Aurelia whispered to herself, "I am no longer the woman forced down the aisle in a gown that felt like chains. I am the woman who built her own life. And love didn't silence me, it made me louder." Her marriage to Magnus was no longer about survival. It was about choice, truth, and respect. And as she continued to build her future, Aurelia carried the certainty that love, at its core, must never cost a person their voice. Because love that silences isn't love at all. The first anniversary of their marriage approached, but for Aurelia, the memory of her wedding day still carried the weight of chains. She had walked down the aisle not with joy, but with fear and resignation. It was a day she had endured, not celebrated. Magnus knew this. He had seen the pain in her eyes when she remembered that day, and he had sworn to give her a memory that would heal the wound he had caused. So, without her knowledge, he began to plan. Not in a cathedral draped with wealth, not in a ballroom filled with strangers, but in the place that meant most to her, the family diner. On the evening of their anniversary, Magnus took Aurelia's hand and led her to the same corner where her life had once been small but safe. But when she opened the door, she gasped. The diner had been transformed. Twinkling lights wrapped around the windows, flowers lined the booths, and the smell of her mother's recipes filled the air. Friends, family, and the employees she had built her chain with filled the room. At the front, where the counter once held coffee mugs, an arch of white roses waited. Magnus turned to her, his voice soft. "The first time, I stole your choice. Tonight I give it back. Will you walk to me again, this time on your own terms?" Tears welled in Aurelia's eyes as her heart pounded. For the first time, the walk ahead wasn't a burden, it was freedom. Aurelia's father stepped forward, his eyes glistening as he offered his arm. "This time, my daughter, you walk not for me, not for debts, but for yourself." She smiled through her tears, shaking her head gently. "No, Dad, tonight I will walk alone." Her heels clicked against the familiar diner floor, but each step was light, filled with certainty. She passed the booths where she had once served coffee, the walls that held her childhood laughter, the counter where her dreams had begun. Every face she passed smiled with love, not pity. This time, the eyes watching her weren't judging, they were celebrating. And at the front, Magnus waited, not cold, not distant, but open, his hands trembling slightly as though he feared she might turn away. But Aurelia didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She walked with her head high, with strength in her chest, with her own choice burning in every step. When she finally reached him, she smiled softly. "This time, I'm here because I want to be." The room fell silent as Magnus took her hands in his. His voice trembled, but every word carried truth. "I married you against your will once. I bound you to me with chains of debt and pride. That day I thought only of what I wanted, not of what you needed, and it is the greatest regret of my life." Aurelia's eyes filled with tears as he continued, his voice breaking. "But today, I stand before you as a man who has learned what love means. Today, I beg you to marry me again, not because I deserve you, but because I cannot live without your love. I want every moment, every truth, every piece of you. No secrets, no walls, only us." He swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving hers. "You are my partner, Aurelia, my equal, my heart. If you will have me again, I vow never to silence you, never to hide from you, and never to forget that love is a choice, and today I choose you." The room erupted in soft murmurs of awe, but Aurelia heard only him. The chains that once bound her felt shattered. His vows weren't promises made from pride, but from humility, from love. The officiant smiled warmly. "Then, Magnus, Aurelia, seal this with a kiss." Magnus's hands trembled as they framed her face, his eyes searching hers for permission. This time, Aurelia leaned forward first, her lips meeting his in a kiss that wasn't hesitant or forced. It was full, deep, alive. The diner erupted in applause, laughter, and cheers. Aurelia's father clapped the loudest, tears streaking his cheeks. Employees hugged each other, and the smell of coffee and cornbread filled the air with the comfort of home. Magnus pulled her close, his forehead pressed against hers. "This is our beginning," he whispered, his voice raw. Aurelia smiled through her tears. Our real beginning. The chains of their first marriage had fallen away, replaced by vows chosen freely, spoken honestly, sealed with love. Later that night, as the celebration quieted, Aurelia sat with Magnus at the corner booth, their hands intertwined. She looked around the diner, the same place that had raised her, now transformed into the place where her life truly began anew. She realized then the lesson her journey had carved into her heart. True love isn't forced, she said softly. It isn't silence or chains. True love is built on choice, on honesty, on resilience. It means walking willingly, speaking openly, and fighting together. Magnus kissed her hand, his eyes filled with reverence. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you. For Aurelia, the girl who once whispered, "This is not love, this is survival," the truth had changed. Now she knew this was love, because it was hers to choose. As the story draws to a close, Aurelia's voice turns outward, her words reaching beyond the diner, beyond the vows. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in second chances. And don't forget to subscribe to Rich Billionaires Romance Stories and for more stories of love, resilience, and the power of choice. Aurelia Brown's journey began with chains. Forced into a marriage she never wanted, she walked down an aisle with fear in her chest and survival on her lips. In Magnus Hale, she found not love, but distance, silence, and secrets buried deep behind his cold exterior. The mansion was beautiful but empty. Her nights were long, her heart uncertain, and her doubts endless. Then came the cracks, whispers of tenderness, flickers of softness, and one night, the truth she never expected, a hidden family, a son he had never confessed. Her world shattered, but in that breaking, Aurelia found her strength. She demanded honesty, she fought for her voice, and instead of crumbling, she rebuilt, reopening her family diner, turning it into a thriving chain, and becoming a symbol of resilience for others. Magnus, once a man of walls and shadows, chose to stand with her openly, not as her captor but as her partner. He faced his guilt, his fear, and his hidden pain, and for the first time he loved her with honesty. On their anniversary, Aurelia walked down the aisle again, not in chains but in freedom, not in silence but in strength. This time, it was her choice. And when Magnus vowed, "I married you against your will once. Today, I beg you to marry me, because I cannot live without your love," and their kiss sealed not survival, but love born of choice. Aurelia's story teaches us what true love requires. Not wealth, not power, but one choice, honesty, and resilience. She was no longer the woman forced into silence. She became the woman who built her life, found her voice, and chose love on her terms.